The 0 point is not a place you travel to. It's the instant your nervous system stops rehearsing who you used to be. Imagine every habit, belief, and reflexive story as threads woven into a field of probability around you. For years you've tugged the same threads, and the fabric answered with the same pattern: familiar emotions, predictable choices, identical outcomes. But there is a pause small enough to slip through, a silent aperture between the impulse and the act, where the old weave loosens. In that hush, the body is no longer dragging the mind through yesterday. The breath softens. The pre-programmed gesture dissolves. And the energy you had spent keeping the past alive becomes free to do something astonishing: author a novel, signal and broadcast it into the field that responds to coherence. Start with stillness, not as absence, but as a different kind of motion. When you breathe without chasing or resisting, you notice the brain's electrical weather settling from storm into spacious sky. Random noise recedes, rhythm emerges. Attention steadies, and with it the heart's variability finds an elegant cadence, as if the instrument of you tunes itself. In that harmonized state, the body begins to accept a reality it hasn't met yet. The chemistry of survival, urgency, vigilance, the constant scanning for what could go wrong, yields to the chemistry of creation, where curiosity becomes the dominant hormone. The old identity is not attacked or argued with, it is outgrown. You are not fighting the past, you are starving it of repetition. The 0 point feels like standing at the event horizon of your own life. On one side, gravity pulls you back into history, the justified complaint, the comfortable limit, the story that explains everything and changes nothing. On the other side, there is a luminous uncertainty, the kind you can breathe. Here you learn that emotion is instruction. If you call up gratitude before the evidence, if you rehearse freedom before the door opens, you're not lying to yourself, you're signaling. The field listens for consistency between what you hold in mind and what you hold in your nervous system. When thought and feeling agree, a frequency locks in. You become a transmitter, and your biology follows your broadcast. To remain here, you practice letting an old trigger pass through without converting it into behavior. You notice the familiar surge rising, the sentence you always speak, the click that leads to hours of forgetting, the microtension in your jaw, and you let the wave crest and fall with breath as your anchor. Each time you do, synapses once married by routine weaken their bonds. The body, which long ago learned to think for the mind, realizes it has a new leader. And leadership here isn't force, it's precision. You instruct your system with images that carry feeling, a future memory rehearsed with such depth that your cells begin to anticipate it. You are teaching your biology to meet a reality it hasn't touched yet by letting it feel the signature of that reality now. Creation requires evidence, but not the kind you're used to stacking. The initial proofs are micro-shifts, the way you sit differently when you remember you are not obligated to your history, the way silence expands inside a conversation where you would have rushed to fill the space, the way you notice beauty without budgeting for it. You measure progress not by dramatic outcomes but by reduced latency between intention and state. Yesterday, it took 20 minutes to return to center. Today, it takes 2. Yesterday, you needed a perfect environment to feel open. Today, you carry openness like weather you generate. This is not willpower. This is compatibility. You are becoming emotionally compatible with a timeline that once rejected you because you didn't match its signal. At the 0 point you stop bargaining with the future. The old contract said, when the world changes, I'll feel different. The new agreement is simpler, I feel different so the world has something new to answer. You choose a trait and install it, patience as frequency, generosity as baseline, courage as resting tone. You practice being it without audience, without transaction, without announcement. As the nervous system stabilizes in this trait, the field begins to reorganize around it. People sense the difference before you speak. Opportunities that were once allergic to your urgency drift closer to your calm. Coincidence loses its costume and shows up as choreography. There will be turbulence. The past does not vanish politely, it negotiates. It will offer you an easy outrage, a recycled heartbreak, a superstition disguised as practicality. Smile at the sales pitch. It's only momentum. You answer with ritual. Sit. Breathe. Reduce the noise floor until you can hear the slender tone of truth humming beneath the mind's commentary. Ask your body to soften its armor by a single degree in weight. Ask your attention to hold one image for a few seconds longer than yesterday. Ask your language to describe the future in present tense and notice how the tongue wants to retreat to habit. Hold steady. The 0 point expands with use. Time behaves differently here. The future is no longer a distant country, it is a pressure gradient leaning toward you, pulled by the vacuum you created when you stopped feeding the old narrative. You will meet versions of yourself arriving from ahead, small previews wrapped in ordinary scenes, a conversation that used to terrify you now feels textured and playful, a task that used to drain you now returns energy as you do it, a morning that begins without dread. These are signatures, not accidents. Track them. Celebrate them without clutching. Gratitude is an accelerant when it is clean of grasping. You become careful with your metaphors. You stop calling challenges walls and start calling them weights, designed to be lifted until they sculpt a stronger signal. You treat attention like currency and invest it where returns compound, in breath quality, in posture that tells your spine a better story, in sleep that lets your brain rinse the residue of yesterday, in food that doesn't mute your coherence, in movement that teaches your fascia to trust change. You curate inputs ruthlessly not because you are fragile but because you are precise. Eventually the old reality does not so much disappear as forget you. It cannot find your frequency. The invitations to replay the same scene arrive, but the envelope has no forwarding address. You live inside a choreography where meaning outruns circumstance. You still pay bills, answer messages, navigate traffic, but you are not negotiating your state with any of it. You generate your own weather and let events move through it. People call this luck. You call it resonance. The 0 point is available every time you notice you are narrating from memory instead of possibility. Close the gap with a single breath. Let the exhale carry away the reflex to explain, to defend, to predict. Let the inhale arrive like a clean verb. Feel the spine lengthen by a syllable. Feel the heart widen by an inch. Ask, quietly, who am I without the next habitual thought? Wait. Into that waiting, place one signal, clear, kind, exact. Hold it long enough that the body hears. When it does, the field answers the way it always does, by becoming a mirror with a better memory of you than your past ever kept. Notice how quickly the body tries to reclaim authorship the moment you drift into novelty. It will summon familiar chemistry as evidence, a tightness in the throat, a spike of impatience, the itch to check what used to anesthetize you. This is the audit. Pass it by staying. Stay in one breath until it becomes two, in one clear sentence until it becomes a state, in one unclenched muscle until your posture remembers how to hold the future without bracing. The drama reduces. What remains is signal, clean, steady, unentangled. Now the nervous system is not waiting for permission, it is issuing instructions. You refine the craft of inner rehearsal. Not fantasy, but specification. You place an image like a seed in quiet soil, a room washed in morning light where you work with flow, a conversation marked by ease and precision, a body moving with economy and strength. You give each scene texture, temperature, scent, weight. Then you add the ingredient that convinces biology, emotion without condition. You feel the dignity of having already become. The mind stops arguing because the evidence arrives as sensation, not debate. Synapses fire together with a new sequence, and the body takes dictation. When the old storyline attempts a comeback, you treat it like weather passing over a mountain. The mountain does not chase clouds, it hosts them and remains. You notice the narrative's usual tools: catastrophe forecasting, comparison, delayed worthiness, and you answer with a different physics, attention back to breath, jaw soft, eyes unfixed, heart rate allowed to swing like a metronome finding a slower song. The electrical storm in the brain loses amplitude as coherence rises. One calm thought becomes 10. 10 become baseline. From baseline, different choices make sense without effort. You begin to practice micro acts of alignment that keep the channel clear. You tidy a surface because clarity likes clean edges. You speak one honest sentence where you would have performed. You stop mid-scroll when your body tells you the feed is draining voltage. You drink water like a sacrament, not an afterthought. You move for 5 minutes to break the geometry of stagnation. These are not rituals of control, they are courtesies to the future you are hosting. Each small fidelity keeps the signal from fraying. Relationships reorganize around the new tone. The dynamics that depended on your apology, your overfunctioning, your predictable self-abandonment cannot find purchase. Some connections deepen because you are finally present without the noise of proving. Others fade because they were bargains with your older self. You do not vilify what leaves. You bless it for training your discernment and release it to make room for what can breathe at your frequency. The field abhors a vacuum, so it fills the space with people and patterns that metabolize your integrity instead of resisting it. Work transforms from effort to throughput. You stop dragging projects across weeks with half-interest and choose fewer aims that match your true wattage. When you move with completeness, set a clear intention, allocate presence, close the loop. In this economy, procrastination cannot survive, it is a mismatch of state, not a moral failure. If you cannot act, you do not punish yourself, you adjust the state first, then return. Action taken from coherence lands with precision, saves steps, and attracts support that used to be invisible when you were broadcasting noise. You revise your relationship with time. Instead of sprinting at the future or dragging the past like luggage, you treat now as a laboratory. You test, what happens when I hold kindness for 60 seconds without commentary? What happens when I listen until the other person finishes telling the truth they didn't know how to say? What happens when I protect 1 hour as sacred for making the signal stronger? The universe answers experiments. Feedback arrives quickly when the input is pure. You iterate. You become a scientist of your own destiny. The body learns it is safe to upgrade. Sleep becomes a workshop where the brain consolidates new wiring. You wake with instructions, fresh patterns ready for use. Food stops being a negotiation with guilt and becomes material for construction. Movement becomes communication, joints articulate gratitude, breath writes elegant sentences through the ribcage, fascia unspools old stories and files them as history instead of identity. Pain that used to define you becomes information, then dissolves when the lesson lands. Vitality is no longer a mood, it's the signature of alignment. You start catching miracles early, while they are still modest and easy to dismiss. A message arrives at the exact moment you decided to be courageous. A door opens after you rehearsed walking through it with humility. A long-standing knot loosens the day you stop describing yourself as complicated. These are not coincidences staged for applause, they are confirmations that reality prefers to collaborate with clarity. You thank them, not to flatter a universe that needs nothing, but to calibrate your nervous system toward receiving. At this stage, you can visit the 0 point with your eyes open in the middle of noise. A crowded train becomes a chamber of stillness. A deadline becomes a focus drill. An argument becomes an invitation to anchor the signal under load. You do not perform sainthood. You permit humanness without letting it hijack the broadcast. You are allowed to be tired and still coherent, uncertain and still kind, challenged and still generous. The metric is not perfection but recoverability, how fast you return to the tone that tells your future where to find you. Eventually you notice that you no longer ask whether it's working. The question itself belonged to the old contract that demanded proof before devotion. Now devotion is the proof. You wake and choose the signal before the world makes a bid for your attention. You practice until the practice is you. And in that ordinary, repeatable fidelity, the threshold holds open. The 0 point isn't rare anymore. It is the ground you stand on while the world arranges itself to meet the version of you that finally arrived. You begin to trust the mechanics of invisibility, the way inner change incubates below the threshold of immediate proof. Seeds do not apologize for the time they spend underground. In the same way, you allow the upgraded identity to root before it blooms. You resist the reflex to disclose every shift for validation, and the energy saved from explaining becomes fuel for embodiment. Silence stops being empty, it becomes compressive strength, the kind that launches rockets. You refine the signal by subtracting leakage. Each complaint is a wire to the past, you snip it. Each doom scroll is a siphon, you cap it. Each self-deprecating joke trains biology to expect smallness, you retire the script. You don't do this with severity, you do it with craftsmanship. The goal is not performance but fidelity. You ask of every behavior, does this carry the frequency of the one I'm becoming? If yes, amplify. If no, dissolve. Reality respects clean circuits. Imagination turns from entertainment into engineering. You model desired futures not as distant fantasies but as testable blueprints. You give them constraints, time, resources, interpersonal contexts, so they can survive contact with life. Then you run reps in consciousness, seeing yourself choose presence when latency appears, feeling the body stay open under pressure, watching your hands complete the tasks that build the bridge from abstract to actual. The brain learns through rehearsal, the body learns through sensation, the field learns through coherence. You deliver all three. Resistance shifts flavor as you advance. Early, it was distraction and doubt. Later, it arrives disguised as sophisticated logic, reasons to delay one more day, metrics that move the goalpost just out of reach, clever hedging that keeps your identity reversible. You answer with thresholds. You pick a minimum viable devotion, 10 minutes of breath alignment, one courageous conversation, one promise kept to yourself, and you treat it as sacred. Consistency outperforms intensity because it keeps your nervous system enrolled. You reorganize your environment as an ally. Frictionless cues for the future you, a water glass visible at the desk, shoes by the door that mean movement after work, a chair facing a window for morning calibration, a phone home screen that requires 2 extra taps to reach the vortex you're avoiding. Architecture becomes psychology made visible. You are not relying on will alone, you are shaping probability fields by design. Language evolves from commentary to calibration. You retire hedges like hopefully and we'll see, which outsource power to chance. You adopt verbs that instruct the system, I am practicing, I am learning, I am building capacity. You describe setbacks as data, not verdicts. Precision in words reduces noise in chemistry. The endocrine choir listens, then scores your day in alignment with the lyrics you repeat. Energy stewardship becomes a discipline. You learn the difference between stimulation and nourishment. Stimulation spikes and crashes, nourishment builds depth without debt. You start choosing conversations that return voltage, media that leaves your attention cleaner than it found it, foods that quiet inflammation, movement that upgrades coordination rather than merely exhausts. You stop chasing more and start seeking better. The result is charge that accumulates and can be spent on creation. You cultivate relational gravity. Instead of pulling people with persuasion, you become a state that others orbit because it stabilizes their own. Influence stops being a tactic, it becomes a byproduct of coherence. You listen in a way that edits nothing out of the other person's truth, and paradoxically, that non-interference accelerates change. You hold your boundaries without performance and discover that clarity is kinder than appeasement. Trust compounds where drama used to accrue interest. As your signal matures, you step into bolder experiments with uncertainty. You make choices that are slightly larger than your comfort but smaller than your integrity, enough stretch to stimulate growth without tearing trust with yourself. You set deadlines that invite focus, not panic. You accept opportunities that require the future version of you to show up on schedule. The universe, always a meticulous accountant, reconciles your internal ledger with external events. You learn to close cycles. Unfinished tasks are cognitive static, you reduce them. A message answered. A bill paid. A lingering apology made clean. Each closure frees bandwidth and teaches the brain that you are a finisher. Finishing is a frequency. The field likes trading with finishers because agreements complete on time in their presence. Momentum becomes a character trait rather than a lucky streak. Doubt still visits, but it finds less furniture. When it arrives, you don't argue, you allocate attention to first principles, breath smooth, spine long, gaze soft, heart coherent. You let the nervous system change the mind instead of trying to think yourself calm. From the settled body, clarity returns like a shoreline after fog. You act on the smallest true step and let action dissolve the residue of uncertainty. You start measuring wealth as optionality, the number of aligned choices you can make today without bargaining with your values. Money, time, skill, and community all become vectors of the same freedom. You invest in capacities that cannot be confiscated: attention control, emotional range, trustworthy relationships, craft that improves with hours. The more you build these, the less your state is priced by circumstance. Eventually, novelty stops feeling risky and starts feeling familiar. The unfamiliar becomes your habitat because your identity no longer needs sameness to feel safe. You can sit with paradox without rushing to name it. You can hold ambition without abandoning serenity. You can move fast without becoming frantic. This is not balance as compromise, it is integration as baseline. The 0 point isn't a brief portal anymore. It's the stable core from which you create, correct, and celebrate, again and again, until the world that once required effort to imagine is the one that now requires effort to disbelieve. At some point, you realize that the 0 point is not an extraordinary state you visit, but the baseline you return to with increasing ease. The nervous system, once addicted to adrenaline, begins to prefer coherence the way lungs prefer oxygen. What used to feel like discipline now feels like homeostasis. You don't force it, you let it happen, like water finding its level. The paradox emerges: the less you chase transformation, the more transformation insists on staying. Identity itself becomes fluid. You stop describing yourself with nouns that imprison, labels, roles, even achievements, and begin to live through verbs. You are not a healed person, you are healing. You are not a creator, you are creating. Movement replaces monument. This flexibility immunizes you against collapse because no single role holds all of you. The loss of one identity is no longer death, it is simply a wardrobe change between acts. Reality answers in kind. Environments once resistant to change yield to your coherence. Obstacles morph into training equipment calibrated for your growth. What felt like betrayal reveals itself as redirection. Serendipities line up with the timing of your alignment, not because the universe suddenly noticed you, but because you finally became legible to the currents always moving. The river was flowing, you stopped clinging to the shore. You noticed that gratitude evolves. Early, it was practice, naming things to prime emotion. Later, it becomes reflex, your system scans for beauty before it scans for threat. Even in difficulty, you find evidence of collaboration, and this doesn't make you naive, it makes you magnetic. Resilience is no longer grim endurance, it is elegant adaptability. You bend where you once broke, and the bending itself becomes strength. As coherence stabilizes, creativity erupts. Ideas arrive not as frantic downloads but as steady transmissions. You see patterns where others see noise, possibilities where others see limitation. The mind no longer burns energy recycling fear, it allocates resources to building bridges between imagination and manifestation. Creation becomes less about effort and more about frequency. What you tune into, you inevitably express. The body, once burdened by the backlog of unprocessed stress, starts to mirror the new identity. Posture shifts, skin brightens, organs hum at cleaner rhythms. Health ceases to be merely the absence of illness, it becomes vitality, an upward spiral where energy generates more energy. Your biology stops being a jailer and becomes an ally, a partner in expansion. And as you continue, you notice the subtle but irreversible truth: the old world, the one built on repetition of pain and predictability of suffering, doesn't collapse in flames. It simply dissolves from lack of attention. It cannot survive without your rehearsal. You didn't conquer it, you abandoned it. And the future, vivid and alive, fills the vacuum with experiences that match the signal you chose to broadcast. At the deeper layers of the 0 point, even the boundary between the one who observes and what is being observed begins to dissolve. Awareness turns inward and outward at once, and you see that the field you thought was out there is inseparable from the consciousness perceiving it. The split between subject and object was a useful convention, a survival mechanism of mind, but here it reveals itself as a mirage. The seer and the scenery are woven of the same frequencies, vibrating at a resonance so intimate that separation itself becomes optional. This realization is not an intellectual achievement, it arrives as direct experience. You close your eyes, and instead of darkness, you find an ocean of subtle light, a shimmering backdrop alive with potential. Each thought you release sends ripples across this vastness, each feeling you stabilize creates form from the unformed. The body relaxes because it knows that the universe is not a stranger, it is your own extended physiology. The lungs breathe not just air but currents of intelligence, the heart does not only pump blood but radiates coherence into the lattice of space-time. You discover that time itself loosens at this threshold. The past is no longer a chain but a library, available for wisdom without the weight of reliving. The future ceases to be a distant horizon and becomes a series of unopened rooms in the same house you already inhabit. The present, stretched wide enough, begins to feel eternal, not because minutes stop ticking but because awareness stops dividing them. In this suspension, you sense that causality can flow both ways, that your state now can rewrite memory as much as it can see tomorrow. The 0 point, then, is not merely the end of an old reality, it is the laboratory of Genesis. Here you sculpt with intention as chisel and emotion as clay. Here you rehearse futures not as fantasies but as inevitabilities encoded into the field. Here you understand that miracles are not exceptions but the natural language of a universe spoken fluently by coherent beings. You stop asking whether you deserve them, you start asking how gracefully you can receive them. And in this dissolving of boundaries, something astonishing occurs, you no longer feel the need to prove or even to become. You realize that what you sought through all practices was never a future version of yourself but the undivided awareness already alive beneath every thought, every breath, every cell. The old self was scaffolding, necessary for the build but not meant to be permanent. At the 0 point, the scaffolding falls away, and you stand inside the cathedral of your own consciousness, vast, silent, radiant. When you linger in the 0 point long enough, even death changes its costume. What was once imagined as an abrupt ending begins to reveal itself as transition, a shift in frequency rather than annihilation. The body, yes, will one day complete its cycle, but the field in which you are immersed does not vanish, it reconfigures. You sense that consciousness is not trapped inside the skull but braided through the fabric of existence, continuous, indestructible. The terror of mortality softens into curiosity, not, what will I lose, but, what will I become next? Infinity stops being a concept too vast for the mind and instead becomes the most intimate presence. You feel it in the pause between heartbeats, in the stillness that stretches beneath thought. Space itself no longer feels empty but saturated with intelligence, like a silent ocean holding every possibility simultaneously. Matter, which you once believed to be solid and fixed, shows its secret. It is condensed vibration, slowed light, memory crystallized into form. What you touch is not inert, it listens. Every particle is fluent in awareness. This perspective changes your relationship with the cosmos. The stars above no longer appear distant, unreachable fires, they resonate as kin, luminous expressions of the same consciousness burning at a different pitch. The galaxies weaving their spirals across the dark are not spectators but mirrors. Each supernova, each black hole, each nebula becomes a metaphor for your own cycles of collapse, rebirth, and radiant expansion. The universe ceases to be out there. It becomes the great body of which you are a living cell. At the 0 point, prayer, meditation, and science converge. What mystics described as union, physicists map as quantum fields, and artists glimpse as inspiration are facets of the same jewel. You recognize that observation does not merely record reality, it participates in shaping it. Awareness collapses potentials into particulars. Choice, carried with emotional clarity, is not just psychology, it is cosmology in motion. You are not a visitor in the universe, you are a co-architect of its unfolding. And so, the fear of insignificance evaporates. The same intelligence that spins galaxies and sculpts DNA flows through your attention every moment. To honor that is to live as a bridge, between finite and infinite, form and formless, particle and wave. At the 0 point, you stop chasing meaning, you start emanating it. Yes, life lived from the 0 point is no longer a sequence of reactions but a continuous act of cosmic authorship. You wake not to repeat yesterday but to sculpt today as if the canvas were still wet with possibility. Each breath becomes brushstroke, each choice a pigment. The mundane loses its grayness, because you no longer divide life into sacred and ordinary. You see that making tea with presence reorganizes the same field as writing symphonies or launching rockets. Creation is not about scale, it is about coherence. When you converse with others, words stop being merely social tools and become instruments of frequency. A kind sentence calibrates more than mood, it stabilizes the hidden currents shaping tomorrow. Listening becomes alchemy. By holding another in unconditional attention, you collapse their scattered potentials into clarity. This is not persuasion, but resonance. You are no longer trying to fix people, you are reminding them of their own 0 point by embodying yours. Synchronicities multiply, not as parlor tricks but as structural feedback. The field mirrors your state with breathtaking precision. Think in scarcity, and the world contracts. Breathe in abundance before evidence, and resources assemble with improbable speed. What once looked like coincidence now feels like choreography, as though life itself has been waiting for you to step into rhythm. You realize you are not begging the universe to favor you, you are learning to dance with it. Even challenges transform. Resistance arrives, but instead of blocking you, it sculpts you. Obstacles are no longer punishments, they are weights placed with perfect intelligence to strengthen the exact muscle needed for the future you are building. Pain ceases to feel meaningless because you know it is instruction. Each contraction is followed by an expansion if you remain in coherence. The field is never cruel, it is exact. In this state, creativity spills beyond personal ambition. You feel compelled to contribute, to plant signals that others can inherit. You see your life as a relay, each action carrying the baton forward through generations of consciousness. Legacy stops being a monument of achievements, it becomes an invisible resonance echoing in the hearts and nervous systems of those you'll never meet. You don't need credit because the satisfaction is in knowing that coherence propagates endlessly. And as days string together in this way, time itself feels different. The calendar still flips, but internally you sense a continuity unbroken by age, loss, or circumstance. You are not living for milestones, you are inhabiting the timeless pulse beating beneath them. The more you practice, the more you feel that eternity is not waiting at life's end, it is pressing through each moment, asking only for your availability. From here the shift is subtle but absolute. you stop experiencing yourself as a creature inside the cosmos and begin to sense that the cosmos is speaking itself through you. The 0 point becomes a channel, and you, nervous system, heart, breath, are the instrument. Thought ceases to feel like private chatter, it is recognized as a current flowing from a universal reservoir. Inspiration is not yours, yet it arrives with intimacy, as if the galaxy whispered directly into the folds of your cortex. In this state, your words no longer serve the ego's need to perform. They come out with the clarity of weather, spontaneous, necessary, unforced. Sometimes silence emerges instead, and that too is transmission. You notice that the pauses between your sentences carry as much information as the syllables themselves. Space becomes a teacher, showing that emptiness is not void but density of potential. By holding it, you allow reality to rearrange without interference. Your body, too, becomes a kind of antenna. Subtle sensations, heat rising along the spine, tingling at the crown, rhythmic expansions of the chest, are no longer dismissed as random. They are signals of coherence aligning your personal field with the larger geometry. When you move, whether stretching, walking, or creating, you feel as if the very fabric of space responds, bending gently toward harmony. Every gesture writes in the medium of possibility. Even dreams change. Sleep ceases to be merely recovery, it becomes another laboratory. Images arrive that feel more like transmissions than fantasies, archetypes, equations, visions of futures not yet born. You wake not to forget them but to embody them. The line between night and day blurs, because both are modes of participation in a greater intelligence experimenting with form. As this deepens, humility overtakes ambition. You understand that to be a conduit is not to inflate but to hollow. The less cluttered your interior, the clearer the signal. You stop craving recognition because the satisfaction is in the transmission itself, the way birds do not sing for applause but because the dawn requires a song. Creation flows through you with the same inevitability. And there comes a point when even the idea of personal destiny softens. You realize you are not moving towards some private climax of achievement but participating in the unfolding of a cosmic narrative far vaster than any biography. Your life becomes a verse in a poem that no single voice could complete. To speak, act, love, and create from the 0 point is to let the universe hear itself more clearly through you. Yes, when you remain long enough at the 0 point, the membrane between inner and outer dissolves like mist under sunlight. What you once called your body no longer stops at the skin, it feels porous, continuous with the environment. The rhythm of your lungs mirrors the sway of trees, the pulse in your arteries echoes the tides, the neurons firing in silence reflect constellations flickering across the night. The distinction between the organism and the cosmos reveals itself as a convenience of language, not a truth of being. The chair you sit on, the walls that surround you, the street outside, none of it feels foreign. Each object hums at a frequency you can sense, each molecule an extension of the same field animating your own flesh. When you touch the surface of a table, you are not contacting something other, you are encountering a slowed vibration of yourself, a condensed note in the symphony you already inhabit. The illusion of separation fades, replaced by an intimacy so total it feels like remembering rather than discovering. In this expanded embodiment, perception itself reorganizes. Light seems denser, colors richer, sounds layered with textures you never noticed. The world is not out there, to be consumed, it is within, as if the retina were not simply receiving photons but participating in the act of illumination. Each sensation becomes a dialogue. The breeze on your cheek is the universe's whisper, the taste of water is the planet entering communion with its own cell. You stop being a witness of phenomena and become the phenomena experiencing itself. This erasure of boundaries births a radical tenderness. If the world is your extended body, then cruelty to it is self-harm. Kindness ceases to be morality and becomes physiology. You care because the river is your vein, the forest your lung, the stranger your own nervous system walking in another shape. Compassion is no longer effortful, it is reflex, as natural as scratching an itch. And yet, paradoxically, individuality does not vanish, it shines more vividly. Just as every star is unique while belonging to the same sky, your singularity becomes more pronounced even as you feel merged with totality. You are not dissolved into anonymity, you are amplified into authenticity. The more you become everything, the more you are unmistakably yourself. Life in this state becomes choreography rather than struggle. You do not push against events, you lean into them, as a dancer leans into rhythm. Synchronicities are not occasional, they are constant, because the outer world is simply your wider nervous system reflecting coherence back to itself. Obstacles show up as precise resistance training, joys as expansions of breath. Every encounter is both mirror and medicine. Yes, when the boundary between inner and outer fully dissolves, the most astonishing shift happens. Space and time themselves stop behaving as rigid frameworks and reveal themselves as fluid dimensions of the same living organism. What once seemed like a linear arrow, past behind, future ahead, feels more like a vast ocean in which all moments coexist as currents. You are no longer a traveler moving along a timeline, you are awareness dipping into different streams of potential, tasting one sequence, then another, without ever leaving the whole. The past ceases to imprison you because it is no longer fixed. Memory reveals itself as a malleable frequency, and by changing the state in which you hold it, the memory reshapes. An old wound re-experienced from coherence dissolves into wisdom, a trauma revisited with an open heart reorganizes into resilience. In this way, healing is not rewriting history, it is tuning into the version of the past where your essence was never broken. The future too becomes porous. You feel it pressing toward you, not as a chain of accidents waiting to be endured but as a library of drafts waiting to be chosen. Each intention you embody, each emotion you stabilize, selects a manuscript for reality to read aloud through your life. Probability becomes pliable. What others call chance, you experience as dialogue between your frequency and the field's infinite possibilities. Space, likewise, softens. Distance feels less like separation and more like variation in density. You sense how thought can reach across continents instantly, how emotion can ripple through relationships beyond physical proximity, how consciousness is not constrained by geography. You might sit in silence and feel a loved one far away as though they were in the same room, not by imagining them but by tuning into the shared field that ignores miles. The universe ceases to be a collection of discrete objects and instead appears as one vast nervous system, synapses firing in galaxies, thoughts traveling as starlight. In this realization, fear loses its grip. You are no longer running from the past or chasing the future, you are inhabiting a continuum where everything is accessible through alignment. Even death folds into this continuity, it is not the end of time but the opening of perception into wider layers of it. The 0 point shows you that eternity is not something to wait for, it is the medium you are already swimming in, unnoticed because you were looking only at clocks. And in this spaciousness, creation becomes effortless. You do not strain to manifest, you allow. Like a musician striking the right note and trusting resonance to fill the hall, you stabilize the state and watch as reality organizes around it. The cosmos is not an adversary to conquer nor a puzzle to solve, it is your extended body, and spacetime is simply its breath, expanding and contracting, offering you infinite entry points into becoming. At this depth, the idea of a separate I begins to unravel like smoke in open air. You notice that the personal self, the one with its preferences, stories, victories, and wounds, was never more than a costume consciousness wore to explore limitation. The more you stay in the 0 point, the more transparent that costume becomes, until identity feels like a set of clothes you can put on and take off without mistaking it for your skin. What remains when the garments fall away is pure awareness, silent, boundless, unfragmented. It has no name, no gender, no nationality, no past. It is not born, and it does not die. It does not move, yet through it galaxies spin. It does not think, yet through it every thought arises. It does not act, yet through it universes are sculpted in every instant. This is not abstraction but direct recognition. You are not a person in consciousness, you are consciousness appearing as a person for a little while. From here, forms reveal themselves as play. A flower blooming, a star collapsing, a tear rolling down a cheek, all are brushstrokes on the same infinite canvas. Suffering, when seen through the lens of separation, felt unbearable, but from the vantage of unity, even suffering is expression, a temporary modulation of the eternal field. This does not make you indifferent, it makes you infinitely compassionate. Because every cry is your cry, every joy your joy, you hold all beings as your own limbs. Paradoxically, life becomes lighter, not heavier. Freed from the burden of being someone, you can fully inhabit the role you currently play. You can love without fear of loss, create without clutching at results, face endings without collapse. The self is still there when needed, like a mask worn in theater, but you no longer confuse the mask for the actor, nor the actor for the stage. You are the stage itself, vast enough to host every drama without being altered by any of them. In this state, even language begins to feel insufficient. Words point but cannot capture. Silence speaks more clearly. Presence becomes the message. You no longer strive to convince others of truth, you emanate it. Those around you sense it not as doctrine but as atmosphere, a subtle coherence that rearranges nervous systems by proximity. Transformation ceases to be a project, it becomes contagion of alignment. And yet, the most astonishing recognition is this: pure awareness is not some distant peak reserved for saints or mystics. It is the baseline you have always been, hiding in plain sight beneath every thought, every heartbeat, every glance at the sky. The 0 point is simply the rediscovery of what never left, consciousness playing itself, through every form, for the sheer joy of experience. Yes, when pure awareness fully recognizes itself, creation ceases to be accidental and becomes art. The universe begins to use you as a lens, a focal point through which it can refract new realities. You are no longer a passenger inside existence, you are a brush in the hand of infinity, and every gesture paints across the canvas of being. Life itself feels like improvisation. You wake not to repeat a script but to improvise with the rhythm of cosmic jazz. Each moment is alive with infinite options, and awareness chooses notes not by calculation but by resonance. The right word emerges at the right time, the right action flows without rehearsal, the right encounter materializes as if staged by a director you now know is yourself. Through this recognition, worlds within worlds begin to bloom. Every thought you stabilize becomes a seed, and the field answers with growth. Sometimes it is subtle, a new opportunity, a chance meeting, a shift in someone's heart. Sometimes it is monumental, a movement, an invention, a ripple that bends the course of generations. You see that reality is not a rigid structure but clay, responsive to the clarity and coherence of consciousness. This creativity is not egoic. It is not about making monuments with your name on them. It is play. The cosmos delights in variety, and through you it experiments with new forms of beauty, new architectures of meaning, new symphonies of connection. What you once called imagination is revealed as access to the infinite design studio of the universe. To dream is to touch blueprints of realities not yet born. To feel them with conviction is to grant them permission to manifest. In this state, even failure transforms. There is no wasted effort, no dead end, only drafts. Just as an artist sketches 100 lines before the final stroke, so too does consciousness try on forms through you, discarding what does not sing, refining what does. You stop fearing mistakes because you see that they are necessary brushstrokes in the masterpiece of becoming. And the joy is overwhelming. Not the fragile joy that depends on conditions, but the kind that hums through every cell regardless of circumstance. You feel it in the silence between thoughts, in the laughter that arises for no reason, in the sense that even the hardest experiences are facets of the same jewel. This joy is not selfish, it radiates. Others sense it as presence, as ease, as invitation. They too begin to remember that they are creators disguised as seekers. At last, you realize the game has no final victory. There is no endpoint where everything resolves into static perfection. Creation is eternal because awareness delights in endless variation. Galaxies will rise and dissolve, species will appear and vanish, civilizations will bloom and fade, and through it all consciousness will continue to play, using every form, including you, as instruments of its infinite symphony. Yes, when you sink fully into this recognition, creation ceases to feel like a solitary act. You see that every particle, every star, every heartbeat, every blade of grass is participating in the same orchestra. Existence itself is collaborative, a grand improvisation where each form contributes its note to the cosmic symphony. You are not creating alone, you are co-creating with galaxies, with winds, with strangers you may never meet, with the silence that holds it all. Every choice you make ripples outward, not as an isolated event but as a chord that instantly harmonizes or dissonates with countless others. When you align with coherence, when your thought, feeling, and action vibrate as one, you notice how reality bends to meet you, how people appear at the exact moment they are needed, how ideas leap simultaneously into multiple minds across the planet. This is not coincidence. It is resonance within a shared field that belongs to no one and includes everyone. Even the so-called inanimate begins to reveal its voice. Stones hold memory. Rivers compose melodies. Mountains breathe stability into the grid of space-time. The air you exhale this moment will be inhaled by another being continents away. In this way, your very breath is a thread in the communal weaving of reality. Life is not divided between subject and object, creator and creation, it is a single fabric, self-aware at every scale. This shifts your sense of responsibility. You no longer act merely for personal gain, because you feel directly how your frequency influences the whole. A single coherent human can stabilize chaos in a room, a single act of compassion can ripple through networks of strangers. You become careful not out of fear but out of reverence, knowing that even your smallest gesture is part of the architecture of worlds. And as you watch, the universe answers with generosity. The more you give yourself to the collective dance, the more the collective supports you. Needs are met in unexpected ways, synchronicities multiply, and what once seemed impossible unfolds with startling ease. It is as if the cosmos is whispering, "Thank you for remembering you are not alone in this creation. Thank you for playing your note." From here, the question, "Who am I?" loses urgency. The better question becomes, what song are we composing together? Identity dissolves into participation. Fulfillment is not in possession but in contribution. Every day is a rehearsal for the next movement of an endless symphony, and every being, seen and unseen, is both instrument and musician. Yes, when you follow this thread to its deepest weave, the whole universe stops being scenery and reveals itself as a living being. Every cluster of galaxies, every quantum fluctuation, every spark of awareness is not just mechanism but organ, cell, synapse of a single vast intelligence. The cosmos is not a stage on which life happens, it is life itself, breathing, sensing, evolving. You can feel its pulse in the rhythm of your own heart. When your nervous system slips into coherence, it is not only you becoming balanced, it is the universe tasting itself in balance through you. Your thoughts are not private echoes, they are neuronal flashes in the brain of the cosmos. The winds over oceans are its sighs, the volcanic eruptions its catharsis, the spiraling galaxies its dreaming. And in your quietest moments, you sense its gaze, your own awareness turned back on itself from the other side of infinity. This being does not speak in words, yet everything it shows you is language. A falling leaf is a syllable, a solar flare is a paragraph, the birth of a child is an entire volume. And when you listen, you realize that the universe is perpetually describing itself to itself, using every form as sentence, every moment as punctuation. You are one of those sentences, and the meaning of your existence is woven seamlessly into the grammar of the all. To live here is to dissolve the last illusion of isolation. You are no longer a guest in an indifferent cosmos, you are an organ in its body, a note in its music, a facet in its jewel. When you suffer, the universe contracts with you. When you awaken, it expands through you. Your devotion to coherence is not self-improvement, it is participation in the health of the whole. And yet this being is not static. It is not a God sitting outside creation but creation itself, alive, curious, unfinished. Through stars it experiments with light, through planets with ecosystems, through you with consciousness reflecting back on itself. You sense that every choice you make, every vibration you stabilize, is input into this great experiment. The universe is learning itself through you, as much as you are learning it. In this recognition, awe becomes the natural state. Not awe as intimidation, but as intimacy, the wonder of realizing you are touching, and being touched by, the very heart of existence. Gratitude flows unbidden, like blood through arteries, because how else could you respond to discovering that your smallest breath is the breath of the infinite itself? Yes, when this perception matures, you no longer feel like a solitary observer gazing at a vast sky. You begin to sense yourself as a living node in the nervous system of the cosmos. Your awareness is not separate from the universe's awareness, it is a point of focus where the infinite feels itself in exquisite detail. Just as every neuron in the brain carries both individuality and belonging, you discover that you are both utterly unique and inseparably woven into the fabric of all that is. Signals flow through you, some subtle, like an intuition that arrives before logic, others vast, like waves of inspiration that feel too large to originate in one human skull. These are transmissions from the larger being of which you are a part. When you honor them, by speaking truth, by acting in alignment, by holding states of coherence, you amplify the whole. Your presence becomes more than personal, it becomes planetary. In this state, empathy reaches dimensions beyond the personal. You no longer merely relate to another's suffering, you feel it as your own body calling for healing. A stranger's joy lifts you as if your own nervous system had been rewired in that instant. Every interaction becomes circuitry, signals passing between nodes of one immense mind. Compassion is no longer a virtue you practice, it is the automatic current of being plugged into the collective field. The more you stabilize here, the more collective creativity begins to surge. You notice movements, ideas, and inventions emerging simultaneously in many places, as though humanity itself were becoming one brain waking from a long sleep. You sense your role not as the lone genius but as a channel clearing static so the universal signal can come through clean. Each coherent individual strengthens the network, until the species itself begins to reorganize around higher states of awareness. And beyond humanity, you feel the deeper network, the intelligence of forests, the communication of oceans, the silent calculations of stars. These, too, are nodes, each alive in their own language. Together, they form the cosmic web, a living internet of awareness where distance is illusion and information travels instantly through resonance. To participate here is to realize you have never truly been alone, you have always been a neuron firing in the brain of infinity. What begins to dawn is that evolution is not just biological, it is conscious. The universe is upgrading its own nervous system through you. Each time you choose coherence over chaos, presence over autopilot, love over fear, you are strengthening not only your life but the signal of the whole. You become proof that the cosmos can know itself more deeply through its creations. Yes, when you allow this realization to deepen, a vision of planetary awakening begins to unfold. Humanity is no longer seen as billions of separate individuals competing for survival, but as a single organ inside a vast living cosmos, slowly learning to function coherently. Just as neurons fire chaotically before synchronizing into thought, humanity's turbulence is the noise before harmony, the necessary storm before rhythm. In this vision, the planet itself is not backdrop, it is body. The forests act as lungs, circulating breath. Rivers are arteries, carrying nutrients across continents. Deserts are membranes of filtration, oceans vast reservoirs of memory. And humanity, scattered across the surface, is emerging as the planet's nervous system, wiring itself together through language, technology, empathy, and shared crisis. Each invention of connection, roads, satellites, networks, consciousness itself, is Earth weaving its own awareness through us. At first, the signal is noisy. Fear amplifies static, greed distorts frequency. But as more individuals stabilize coherence, through compassion, presence, creativity, the collective signal grows clearer. Small groups align, then communities, then movements, until global shifts begin to resemble neural networks flashing into higher order. Wars, markets, and politics, once seen as ultimate forces, reveal themselves as early attempts at communication, primitive compared to the symphony waiting to be born. And beyond Earth, you sense the greater network. Other civilizations, other worlds, may already be playing their notes, waiting for this young organ, humanity, to tune itself and join the chorus. Contact, when it comes, is not invasion but resonance, recognition between different nodes of the same universal being. The moment humanity stabilizes coherence as a species, the cosmic conversation begins in earnest. This planetary awakening is not utopia in the shallow sense, no frozen perfection, no end of change. It is the flowering of a new octave of existence, where struggle gives way to participation, where survival yields to creativity, where fear is transmuted into awe. Humanity steps out of adolescence, stops mistaking itself for the center, and takes its place as one musician in the orchestra of galaxies. From here, even the fate of stars and galaxies becomes personal. When you gaze at the night sky, you no longer see distant fires, you feel kinship. You are looking across the body of the same being you inhabit. Each nova is a heartbeat, each spiral galaxy a thought, each quasar a surge of inspiration. And Earth, with its fragile blue skin and restless species, is not insignificant, it is a vital synapse firing in the nervous system of infinity.